This is an addition that was added on in the 1990s, but it does have a lot of our family treasures. So I do like to start here. You'll notice too the windows, the W and the M, Wagnalls Memorial. And then the grapes, that signifies plenty. Hi, my name is Mabel Wagnalls, and I'll be giving you the tour of this wonderful, wonderful library. I built it in 1925, and we'll go through, as I tell you the story of my family, you'll come to understand all the different parts and all the different reasons why we have all these treasures. I was born in 1869 in Kansas City, Missouri. There are so many wonderful stories to tell about my parents. I will tell you about how my mother and my father met. Both my mother and father were born here in Lithopolis. My father moved to Findlay, Ohio with his family when he was just 5 years old. He was going to Wittenberg College. He was studying to be a Lutheran minister. And he was studying to be a Lutheran minister. He had come here to visit family, to Lithopolis. Every family has one of these people in the Bible, I think. So he's visiting cousin Delia. She said to him, "Adam, are you ever going to get married? What are you looking for in a wife?" And he responded, "Well, I'm looking for someone who grew up like me, poor and is paying her way through college." And cousin Delia said, "Well, I know that woman. Her name is Anna Willis, and she is actually going to school at Xenia College." So they started writing letters back and forth. On the day of my mother's graduation, my father decided to surprise her. So he goes to the graduation. Graduations were a little bit different then. You didn't walk across the stage and have your name read. So my father is not sure which person is Anna Willis. And he was not like this. But as he was sitting there looking at the different women, there were 16 women graduating that day, he thought to himself, "I don't like her hairstyle, or she doesn't look pleasant," that kind of thing. But then he saw my mother and he thought, "Now she looks very fine." So now it's the end of the graduation ceremony. My father does not know what to do. Who do you walk up to? What to do? My mother was always intuitive. So she walked up to my father, she put out her hand and she said, "You must be Adam Wagnalls. I'm Anna Willis." And that's how they met. So they were married shortly after that. My father had graduated. He was a Lutheran minister then, and his first church was in Kansas City, Missouri. So they moved to Kansas City, Missouri, and that's where I was born. My mother, when she married my father, for some reason she started playing the piano 6 hours a day. She wanted to teach herself how to play the piano. She was a pastor's wife with everything that meant. She was really just getting to know her husband, my father. On top of all that, she realized that my father would make a great lawyer. So in the evenings, my mother and father studied law together. Back then, you didn't have to go to school, go to college to become a lawyer. You could just study at home as long as you passed the bar exam. So they studied in the evenings together. And she was keeping the house, all of that. So I was maybe 2 or 3 years old, and my mother and father decided to move to Atchison, Kansas. There was a job opportunity there for my father, something about real estate. And by then he was a lawyer. So he left the job of being a pastor. He was never a pastor again. And we moved to Atchison, Kansas. And that's where my mother decided that she was going to teach me at home. I actually never attended a school. My mother was always my teacher. And it was wonderful. From the very beginning, my mother told me, "Mabel, you're going to be an author and musician." And that's what I ended up being. So actually, I do like to start in this room because there's some things in this room that help tell the family story. So that over there is my grand piano. That was at my home at Do Re Mi Manor. That was on Long Island. When I married my husband, Richard Jones, 1920, we moved to Long Island, and back then you did not have addresses on your homes, you named your home. And since I was a concert pianist, we named our home Do Re Mi Manor. So that is actually one of the Steinways that was at my home. Yeah, I actually had 2, but that's one of them. And then on top of that piano, you'll see a loving cup with some roses. That was given to me by the townspeople on the day of the dedication. It's very special to me. I actually did end up being an author and musician. Right from the beginning, my mother's education for me was all about those two things. I would write each day, I would play the piano each day, and it was a wonderful way to grow up, a wonderful education. So now it's 1876, I'm 7 years old. We're living in Atchison, Kansas, and my father went to New York, something about the American Centennial. He meets up with this gentleman, Isaac Funk. Isaac Funk had started a small publishing company. What he was publishing at that time was just one journal. It was called the Homiletics Journal. Isaac Funk also went to school at Wittenberg College, and he also was a Lutheran minister. However, he had started school, he had actually graduated from school in the spring, and my father started at Wittenberg College the following autumn. So it wasn't like they went to school together, but they met up somehow, probably certain circles or whatever. Maybe they had heard of each other or something. So they met up in New York City, and Mr. Funk needed money. Publishing is a very expensive business to run. My father met with Isaac Funk. My father had $5,000 that he had saved. Right from the beginning, our family always lived well below our means. My father was very much a saver. That's just how we lived. So he decided to join Isaac Funk. So they started that publishing company. They had just enough money to rent a corner of an office. So they had one desk. Mr. Funk sat on one side, my father sat on the other. I remember moving to New York, and I was very excited. My father was actually making $7 a week. We lived in a small 2-room walk-up apartment in New York, but it was very exciting to me because my parents had decided to purchase a secondhand grand piano for me. So if you can imagine this very large piano in this very small apartment. The one room was my mother and father's room. The other room was the everything room. My mother cooked our meals over a kerosene stove. It was our living room. It was my bedroom. It was everything. And in the middle of this one room then was this grand piano. So during the day, I played that piano, and at night, I slept on it. That's how we lived. So now it is a couple years after that. Money was still tight, and my mother, of course, is still teaching me at home, and she wanted to teach me French, so she's thinking to herself, what's the best way to teach Mabel French? Oh, that's it. We're gonna go to Paris for the summer. So we did, just my mother and me. We stayed in a small room. It was 6 flights up. It was near the Arc de Triomphe. I learned how to speak French, but probably even more important than that was the amount of world knowledge I came away with. And one of my best memories was that we lived on rice and chocolate. So we stayed there for the summer, and we came back. Now I'm maybe 9, 10, 11 years old, and money was still tight. My mother's still fixing our hats, sewing our clothes, all of that. But with all those propensities to save, my family, my mother and father still gave me an entire $1 a week to spend on theater. If you can imagine what that opened up for me as far as my writing and my music, and what that did for my future career, it was truly amazing. It's actually my greatest debt that I will always feel for my mother and my father was that. So I'd go to the matinees, I would come home, and at dinner time then my mother, father, and I would discuss what had happened, what I had learned that day. Something that you need to know about my father. He was not your normal, average New Yorker. He was very, very kind. It was always about the 3 of us too, my mother, my father, and me. My mother always called us our little triangle. On my father's sarcophagus, which is located right here in Lithopolis, it reads, never an unkind word said. And that's who he was. Also, on my mother's sarcophagus, I spent a lot of time thinking about what to put on them. On her sarcophagus, it reads, "A woman who helped." And that's who she was. That's what she was. She was the person behind my father, the person behind me. She wasn't pushy. It wasn't like that. She just saw things. She was very intuitive, and she knew how to get things done. And she knew how to bring out the best in my father and me. So going back to when I'm 9, 10, 12 years old, we would have dinner together every night. We would share what I learned at the theater. And it was, again, just a very, very special time. So now I'm maybe 16 years old, 17 years old. I'm about 16 years old. And my mother's taught me all the piano she could. She's trying to determine what's the best way to teach Mabel piano. What should we do now? Well, it made sense to us. We moved to Berlin, Germany. We lived there actually for 4 years, my mother and me. I studied with Franz Kulick. He was the director of the conservatory there, and it was a wonderful, wonderful musical education that I received. The hard part, though, was that my father stayed in New York. Of course, he had to keep that business going. Money was still tight, but my mother and I lived very frugally, and that was fine by us. That's how we lived all the time. It was not something to think about. But I received a wonderful musical education there. I was 21 years old. It's 1890 now, and I made my successful European debut there, and it was wonderful. Oh, something else I need to tell you about when we were in Germany. My nickname there was "Where's Mama?" Because if my mother wasn't there, that's what I was asking, "Where's Mama?" My mother and I were most people thought we were sisters. We were definitely best friends. It was always, when we were there those 4 years, it was always about the two of us. We read each other's minds, we finished each other's sentences. It was a very special time for us. So now I've made my successful debut, and we come back to New York, which was wonderful. We're back with my father. And again, money was still tight, but at that point in 1890, that's when my father's company, Funk and Wagnalls Publishing, started publishing the Literary Digest. The Literary Digest was a weekly magazine, and what that was all the headlines, all the stories from newspapers around the United States, the main stories, they were all compiled in one magazine for that week. We have covers of the Literary Digest here in this room. That one there is D.C. Hutchinson, and it is the Pony Express. Over there, that one's actually my favorite, and it is J.F. Kernan, and it's called No School, Some Things Never Change. Look at that dog, look at that little boy. Look at the window, it's so fun to me. J.F. Kernan was known as a poor man, Norman Rockwell. Over here then we have a Sidney Reisenberg, and that is Vive la France. So this is right after World War I. And most of this artwork is about 1917, around that time frame, 1918, right around there. Over here then, we have another Sidney Reisenberg. And that one is called You're Fired. You'll notice that the hat that the gentleman is wearing says war, so it's basically saying the war is over. World War I is over. Over here we have Eleanor Whedon, and it's Boy and Toy Sailboat. And then this is called Day's End. We don't know who the artist is. We have the magazine even that goes with that, but it does not list the artist's name. But it's called Day's End. Any artwork that you see that we show you today will be original. 1890. That's when the Literary Digest started to be published. I was 21 years old, and that's really when Funk and Wagnalls Publishing Company actually started making money. From there, success started coming our way.